Hey you, and welcome to Happy Sex Ed! Today we are going to talk about why sex education is always political. Now you may wonder, how can that be? Sex is one of the most private things we have in our lives. How can it be political? And I often hear people say that sex should be kept out of politics. It is not suitable for politics. Well, today I'm making this video to make the point that that is actually not possible. I'm gonna start off with a tiny history of sex education. This is just to illustrate my point, not really to give you a full overview. First, sex education used to be all about religion. The main point of sex education was to keep people from having sex, to maintain those religious virtues like purity. Then it was all about abstinence and disease prevention. And then in more recent years, it was mainly about anatomy and reproduction. To name some more concrete examples, something that is worth mentioning are the Comstock laws from 1873. These federal laws made it basically impossible to have any kind of access to educative material. Those included abortion, contraception, but also just really basic anatomical facts. It criminalized any kind of sex education to make sure people did not have access to sexual health information. In Nazi Germany, comprehensive sex education was completely banned from schools. Instead, it was used to promote super racist ideologies, and it was mainly focused on having as many children as possible. Pleasure, contraception, and any kind of sexual diversity were completely erased from the curriculum. In China, sex education was virtually completely erased for most of the 20th century. It just did not exist, not even the most basic reproductive principles. Now, while sex education is very slowly making it into schools, it is still very much focused on reproduction and abstinence education, and pleasure or any kind of inclusive sex education are not part of it. As you can see, the point I'm trying to make here is that the sex education we receive is never really about biological facts or sexual health, but much more about the political agenda at the time we are currently in. It always reflects what the current politics want us to know or prefer us not to know. The reason why I really wanted to make this video is because sex education, especially inclusive sex education, is very much under threat right now. This is true in many countries, but I will focus right now on the US because the US oftentimes has a special role when it comes to setting the standard on what is considered normal. Trump and his administration has been pushing to get any kind of LGBTQ friendly sex education out of schools. Schools are actively denied funding if they talk about non-cisgender identities or LGBTQ realities. Furthermore, inclusive projects are actively being defunded. So the access to inclusive sex education is getting more and more difficult. People are not able to work in the way they need to really provide people with good sex education. Now, there are unfortunately so many more examples I could mention here, but again, I just really want to illustrate my point. Sex education is political. Deciding what gets taught equals deciding whose experiences matter. If LGBTQ and non-cis people, as well as disabled people, are not part of the curriculum, they are basically being suggested that their experiences doesn't matter and their sexual health and well-being does not matter. Withholding knowledge is a form of political control. Access to contraception, pleasure education, as well as abortion are fought on political grounds. So we cannot keep sex out of politics. Not just sex education is political, pleasure itself is political. For the longest time, people with vaginas have not been taught anything about their anatomy or their pleasure. Only in the 1960s was the clitoris really recognized as an important part for pleasure. And only in 1998 was the clitoris finally mapped using modern imaging. Before that, it was seen as this tiny knob outside of the body, and the entire internal structure was just not even known about. If you do not learn accurate information about your body, it is so much harder for you to enjoy safe and pleasurable sex. This is obviously quite obvious, but I think it's really important to have it stated like that. People with marginalized identities, those include people of color, non-cis people, female-presenting people, and people with vaginas, face systematic disregard of their sexual health and their sexual pleasure. Studies show that women and other marginalized groups have lower sexual satisfaction, experience more sexual violence, and much higher stigma and shame around their sexuality and their desire. Framing sex education as political shows us that these differences are produced and maintained by society, not by biology. If we look at the bigger picture, what we basically see is that we get taught whose bodies matter more. Sexual violence, purity culture, transphobia, non-cisphobia, all of this is basically rooted in the idea that there are bodies that matter more and are more valuable than others. Sex education can challenge or reinforce this. When we say that all people deserve access to sexual health education and therefore access to healthy and pleasurable sexuality, we are making a political statement. Enjoyable sex is not just personal, it is actually a radical claim against political injustice. So whenever you feel shame or guilt around your body, your pleasure, or your sexuality, remember that this is taught. This is not you. And whenever you feel joy in your body or joy while experiencing sex, remember that you are actively defying a system that is trying to take that away from you. Everyone deserves pleasure, and everyone deserves to learn about how to experience pleasurable sex. Sexual pleasure is deeply human and can be incredibly healing. Inclusive sex education has to include the bodies of non-cis people, trans people, it has to include female bodies, it has to include bodies of color, and it has to include disabled bodies. Often, disabled people are seen as asexual, which could not be further from the truth. Whether it is a mental disability or a physical disability, most people are sexual beings that need access to sexual health education and to pleasurable sex. Now, after this little speech that I gave you, I want to ask you, what do you really wish you would have learned in school about your body, your pleasure, or about your sexuality? Something that you really feel could have changed your perspective and, your life for the better. Thank you so much for watching this video. I am so happy you're here. I find this an incredibly interesting and important subject, and I hope you do too. I further hope that I'm gonna see you next time, and I wish you a wonderful day. Bye!